Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me after lunch. We're going to keep this flowing a little bit. I like to talk and walk, and I hate slides. But I do have some for you, because I know people learn and watch a little differently, but they are here for you. But we're going to kind of talk a little bit. It's going to be a little bit more informal than some of the sessions you may have been to. So I'm going to talk to you today about flattening the curve, successfully transitioning your practice areas. We're going to talk a little bit about who I am and who you are, but one of the things I wanted to do today is just really talk about making some changes because we're here at Clio, and that's a lot of what we're doing today. So who am I? My name, again, is Alycia. I am a wife. I am a mother of 3 boys, a 14-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 6-year-old. So it's a little bit crazy. I'm also a law firm owner. I'm based out of Philadelphia. I practice family law now. And I'm also a podcast host. I have 2 podcasts, and these are my podcasts, The Growth Goal and A House Divided. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why I started the podcast and how that helped me transition with my practice as we go on through the presentation. So I want to get a little bit of information about you guys. How many of you out there are law firm owners? How many of you are solo practitioners? Have any of you changed your practice area in the last few years? Any of you thinking of doing it? All right, good, good. So you are my people. And so I'm hoping that today you'll get a lot of tools to deal with the transition, to be a little bit more comfortable with the transition, especially if you're thinking about it and then just end up into it. But we're going to also talk about some of the emotional things that go into transitioning your law practice as well. So to tell you a little bit more about myself, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer from a very young age. Do any of you guys remember the show Columbo? Yeah, okay. So I'm dating myself just a little bit. And I remember watching that show thinking, I want to be a detective. I really want to go out there. I want to solve all the crimes. And then I watched Matlock. Guys remember Matlock? I saw that, and I'm like, no. That's what I want to do. I want to go into court, and I want to fight for my clients, and I want to win. I am not really an older white guy from the South, but he was still my type of person. That was the thing that I knew that I wanted to do. And as I continue to get older, it didn't really change. I really developed that. When I was 15 years old, I had an opportunity in Philadelphia to go into a clerkship and to work in a law firm. And I enjoyed it. The next summer, my father, who was in the military, got orders to South Korea, and my family, who was living in Oklahoma, we all moved back to Philadelphia for the year. And I had another opportunity to work in a law firm. And this time, I was 16 at the time, going into my senior year of high school, and the firm that I was chosen to work at was a Social Security disability practice. Any of you guys do Social Security disability? So it's mostly a volume-based practice. As a file clerk, I was his very first employee. I actually started working for him before he left his father's practice. And by the time that I left, 16 years later, we had 140 employees. We were nationwide. We were opening tens of thousands of cases, and I was managing the firm. So there was a lot of things that went into that. But the reality of it was, I ended up practicing Social Security disability because that's where I happened to get a clerkship when I was 16 years old. And although I love practicing Social Security disability work, I still do, I had gotten a little bit bored. I had now spent half my life, literally, in the same place, and I needed some change. And I kind of saw this by some of the things that I was doing. I wanted to start other practice areas. If any of you practice disability law, you know that 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of oversight from the government, from the media, and there were a lot of changes that were going on. And some people were dropping out of the practice altogether. Some people were getting smart and kind of hedging a little bit and going to areas like workers' compensation and personal injury. And we did a little bit of that, and I helped to develop those practices, but I still was running the Social Security disability practice. We also looked into family law. And while that did not work directly for the practice, it sparked an interest in me. So I decided to look into that and to go into that area of law eventually. But I just want you guys to know that where you happen to end up because of the first job that you got out of law school, where your father worked or where your sister worked or somebody else worked, is not where you have to end up. So I'm going to talk about the 4 pillars that you can use to transition successfully in your practice area. So 1 is educate yourself. 2 is reimagine and rebuild your practice and your network. 3 is carve out your space. Set yourself apart from everybody else that's doing this new area of law. And then continuously work on mastery. You need to get really good. So I remember my first few weeks of law school, one of the things they told us is that you're going to be knee-deep in books all the time. You're going to be reading case law. You're going to be studying a lot. Find something that's creative, that's an outlet for you to do, so that way you don't lose your mind. I didn't do that. Instead, I worked full-time because I went to school at night for 4 years, so I didn't have a lot of extra time to do anything else. But when I thought about changing my practice and leaving my practice, leaving where I was before, I decided to commit myself to something, and that was the Broad Street Run. So have any of you guys been to Philadelphia? In Philadelphia, there's a main street called Broad Street, and it runs throughout most of the city. And so every May, a bunch of crazy people get together and decide to run the length of Broad Street, and I decided to sign myself up for that. I had not run since probably high school, anything probably over 2 miles, so this 10-mile race was definitely something that was pushing me out of my comfort zone. I knew that once I announced it, it was something that I would have to do. I knew that it would take preparation and dedication and discipline and require me to do a lot more work. So I signed myself up for it. Now, running, I like to say that generally we're an evolved species, and there's no real reason to run long distances if no one's chasing you. But it is a great way to kind of get yourself focused and to clear your head. So I signed up for the Broad Street Run my very first year of leaving the practice. And just to take a step back, that conversation with me leaving where I had been for 16 years went like this. At my yearly review, my boss sat me down, could see that I was bored, that I was restless. At some point in all of this, I decided to go back to school and go to business school and get an MBA, mostly because I just didn't feel challenged. And so as I'm sitting there with him, MBA completed, still kind of bored, he asked me to create the job that I wanted for myself. And I remember sitting there with him and saying, I want your job. And the audacity of it was something that I was extremely comfortable with because I realized that I had helped somebody else build something from one person to 140 employees. He was a millionaire, I was not. You know, and the reality that I helped build everything in there, from developing the attorneys to helping with the process, to taking and creating our own case management system from Salesforce and building it from scratch, all of these things that I had learned, I could be doing for myself and doing on my time and doing for my own family. So that was a conversation that I had. That was what gave me the courage to kind of get out there and do it. I gave 90 days notice, and then I was on my own. And then I had the Broad Street Run in front of me. So what did I do now, kind of looking at the fact that I'm leaving and where I'm going to start? The easiest thing would have been to just do Social Security disability work, right? I have been doing this for literally 16 years, half my life. I knew all of the players. A lot of the people that I train now work for Social Security in the places that I would be going to. It was what I knew, and it was easy, and it was safe, and it probably was smart to do. And I did still do some Social Security work, but the whole reason I was leaving was to challenge myself. So what I decided to do, and what I would encourage you to do first, is educate yourself. You want to spend some time really looking at the things that you need to learn, and there's a lot of ways that you can do that. So the first thing is continuing legal education classes, right? They're not just for you to keep your license and do your 12 and get out every year. They are a great way for you to get very specific knowledge on the field that you're in. I remember when I first started, I went to, we have the Wanamaker building in Philadelphia where our CLE places are held, and they have all the books there. And I remember going in there and buying the books and building my resource library, and it was $69 or $150 or $300. But I began building my resource library, not even just going to the courses, but just building those things up. And then I realized years later, they have this thing called the Pro Pass, which basically allows you to be able to watch any of the continuing legal education classes that they hold for about $200 a year. And that was invaluable to me because if there was ever something that was coming up, something that was maybe a small thing, maybe something that was related to another area of law, I can just go and download that and watch it and get that knowledge, whether or not I was getting credit for it or not. Another thing that you should do is join your local library. When I ran the practice, we had about 20 attorneys, and if we wanted to have a membership at the library, the rules were that we had to get a membership for every attorney. Well, in Social Security world, where it's federal regulations, there was no reason for us to have a membership to the law library. But when I looked at it for myself, being a solo, it's $200. So I did it. And then all of a sudden I have access to all these resources, all the forms that I needed, all the books that I needed, and those CLE books that I was buying were all there, and I could just check them out and then buy them if I needed to. So it was a really good place for me to kind of get in and learn about. The other thing you should do in educating yourself is to join your local bar association. So I live in Philadelphia, which is a huge city, and it's a county in of itself. And then just outside of that is Montgomery County and Bucks County, some other counties. And although family law is state regulated, it's very different from county to county. You have to get in, you have to know the players, you have to know how things are. From the dress code to what's expected to the flow of the courts is all very different from county to county. If you go to your local bar association, just go to those meetings, you'll get to know the players, you'll get to know which judges are crazy, you get to know which ones have crazy expectations of you, you get to know just kind of how to handle yourself. Going into court, not really understanding what it is that you're supposed to do, but having a heads up, knowing some of the players, knowing some of how things are going to go, it's going to put you leaps and bounds ahead of where you are. One of the things that I learned by preparing for the Broad Street Run is that 10 miles is a long way to run, and it's a lot of time. You're spending an hour and a half, 2 hours, if you're like me the first time, basically lost in your thoughts. You're either listening to some music, but you're alone with your thoughts. And I found that sometimes I wanted to quit mentally before my body was actually ready to give out. And I think that's the thing that we worry about a little bit when we're looking to do something new, is some of the things that we're talking to ourselves about, some of the things that we're saying to ourselves. When you start to educate yourself and give yourself that foundation, you start to get your legs up under you, it makes it a lot easier for you. One of the things you can do to educate yourself is to join an Inn of Court. Are any of you members of an Inn of Court? So you guys are familiar with it. So our family court, Inn of Court, is a Nicholas Cipriani Inn of Court, and it's made up of family law attorneys and the judges that we're going to see on a regular basis. So every month we get together at the Hard Rock Cafe in Philadelphia, and 4 attorneys and a judge put together a CLE training, so you get credit for it as well. But again, you're sitting next to the judges who are going to be hearing your cases. You get an opportunity to ask them what they expect in their courtroom. You get an opportunity to meet the other attorneys that are there that are going to be going against you, your opposing counsel. You get to make those relationships. So I would tell you, and usually they're very reasonable. So I would definitely encourage you that if you're going into, and even if you're practicing in an area now, get into an Inn of Court. That information is extremely invaluable. The next thing you want to do besides educating yourself is rebuild and reimagine your practice from the ground up. So if you're changing practice areas like Social Security disability, where it is contingency-based, it's a volume practice, it's federal regulations, it's administrative, it's adversarial, and then switching over to family law where it may be more transactional, it's definitely adversarial, you are going to want to change everything. You want to think about the way that your clients come into your funnel. Think about whether or not they're finding you online. Think about whether it's word of mouth. Think about your intake system. Think about the way your calls are coming in. If you're going to switch to a volume-based practice, you need to make sure that you have enough lines to handle it. You want to change your scripts up. You want to think about the way that you're handling things. So that way you're preparing it. And that may mean changing your case management system. Now, luckily, because we are here at Clio, I am a Clio user. I did use Clio for Social Security disability, and I still use it for family law. There are some things that might have been a little bit better for Social Security disability, but this works really good for family law. But you want to think about the tools that you're using and how those things may need to change. If you're switching from a contingency-based practice to now a billable hour practice, you might need other payment methods or payment systems. So just really sit down and think about what happens as soon as a client needs to reach out to you. And write it all the way down, put it on a whiteboard, involve other people who are actually practicing in this area, and figure out what you need to change. Because trying to use the same tools that you use in your previous practice area is not going to work out well for you. You want to think about rebuilding your team. So if you are working with the same people who, for my example, did Social Security disability and did no family law, you need to train them as well. Sometimes I see that as attorneys, we're not spending enough time training our intake people, our paralegals, our legal assistants on the law, on the things that they're getting asked questions about, and why they should not be giving advice. They should have some knowledge of the way that some things work. So what I used to do in the disability practice and what I do now is that every Friday I send out a memo to my team and I talk about something in family law. So initially it was, these are the definitions of custody. This is what physical custody is. This is what legal custody is. So they have an idea of just what's kind of coming at them. And your team will appreciate the fact that you are going to invest time in them and help them to learn. It's going to help them be able to have more educated conversations with your clients and with other players in the field. So take some time to really rebuild your team. Think about whether or not the people that you have are going to be the right people for the practice you're going into. That attorney who was really good at being an administrative attorney or a transactional attorney may not be the attorney you want going into court handling your cases. And you need to make those decisions as well. So you want to make sure that you're looking at your team. And that includes the C-suite. How many of you guys, I know most of you are solos, have a board? Nobody. I don't have a board, but I have a board. So one of the things that I did when I first started my practice was that I thought about if I could make a team of people, who would I have? I would have an HR person, right? I would have a marketing person. I would have a finance person. I would have an operations person. And I met with people who I knew in real life that did all of those things and did them at a high level. And I asked them, what would you tell me to do? Who would you tell me to hire? What would you tell me to watch out for? What do I need to know from you? And then I meet with them periodically. These are people who are invested in me and my relationship with them and are willing to set some time aside for me and to help me kind of fill the gaps in where I don't have. So don't think that just because you're in a solo that you don't have a network or a village of people who would be willing to share some insight into some of those things that you need to know. Because there's a lot of things that we don't realize, and I know law schools are hopefully getting better at it, but we are not taught all of these things in law school. At least during my time, we weren't. And there's a lot of things that we're kind of making up and figuring out as we go along. But definitely sit with the people who have done it, because they're going to give you some insight. One of the things I did too, kind of my members at large, is that I met with other attorneys who had been in practice for themselves and left and went back to working for someone else. I wanted to know why. Why didn't it work out? Sometimes it was because they didn't like going and getting the business, but sometimes it was because it just was easier. You know, they'd rather just practice law. They'd rather not be worried about the business. Sometimes they would just rather go back, but it just didn't work out. So meet with the people who have done it and failed. Meet with the people who have done it and have been successful, because you're going to get insight from both places. And then one other thing you should do, and one other group of people you should meet with, are people who are practicing what you want to practice. Ask real questions. How much do you charge for this? How do you bill for this? How do you know who to hire? What are your interview questions? All those things we're kind of afraid of asking because it's a little bit embarrassing, or we're not sure, we don't want to say that we don't know it. Ask all those real questions. Ask those things you're going to be sitting by yourself trying to figure out how to do by yourself for 3-4 hours, when you could just bring someone to lunch and just ask them directly. Find that out. People are willing to share information. It's not as hostile as we all think. And I think most of you probably will be willing to sit with somebody else and answer those questions. And if you needed to get outside maybe your practice area or your little practice area, your jurisdiction a little bit, maybe step over to the next county and ask them some questions, if you feel a little bit more comfortable doing that and not asking maybe an opposing party. Rebuild your network. So if you practice in one area and now you're going to practice in another area, you need to think about the people that you need to know. So going from Social Security disability, I needed to know medical providers, I needed to know therapists, just my general referral network, personal injury attorneys generally. In the family law space, it's good for me to still know therapists, but also to know real estate agents, to know maybe estate planning attorneys, maybe immigration attorneys. So you want to broaden your network in that way. So make sure you're spending some time getting to get an idea of the people that you should know, potential referral sources, and just people that you would need to have on your team. Carve out your space. So this is where you get to stand out. And I think it's a little bit difficult for attorneys when you're trying to start something new, because we're used to having all the answers, right? We're the experts. We're who people come to for solutions. And when you're starting all over, you're really an educated, experienced novice. And that's an uncomfortable space to be in, to admit you don't know something. And then it makes you question yourself. If attorneys always want to say yes, but, or it depends, you really want to say it when you're getting into a new practice area. You're not sure. The way that you become sure is by educating yourself, but the other way is just stepping out there and learning. So a few things you can do to kind of carve out your space is to figure out how to provide the information to people in a way that is unique to you. One way to start doing that is to leverage your current knowledge. So another example, in the disability world, when you get Social Security disability insurance payments, there's something called auxiliary benefits. That's something where if their person who's receiving disability payments has a child who's under 18, that minor can get a payment as well. Now, if the parents are separated, that other parent who's getting the benefits might never tell that other parent that that's the thing that happens. It does get factored into the child support guidelines. It can get factored into spousal support guidelines. And what I was able to do initially was talk about that very specifically, something I was very comfortable talking about. I took that, I leveraged the hell out of it, and talked about it in the child support situation. Now, what that did for me was that it made people aware that I'm not just practicing Social Security disability law. People who are in my network now are saying, well, now she knows something about Social Security, and she knows something about family law, and she knows something about child support. I have this question about child support. Maybe I should ask her about it. And what that also does is that it gives you a foundation, something you're really comfortable with. You could take and use that to build your expertise in another area. Again, be innovative about the way you deliver your services. So my podcast, A House Divided, is a family law podcast that I started because I felt like a lot of people had questions that were beyond custody law or beyond divorce that I couldn't answer, or resources that I was finding for people and I was doing it over and over again. So one of the questions I had from one of my clients was basically, my child is a teenager and does not want to follow the custody order. I don't know what to do because if I don't do it, I'm going to be held in contempt. How do I deal with that? I brought on a teen therapist, and that therapist was able to give information to the listeners about how to talk to your child about your custody arrangement, how to look for different things to know that there is something going on wrong with them, how to deal with split loyalties. We brought on real estate agents to talk about getting your house appraised. I brought on a recruiter who talked about what to do if you have been out of the work field because you've been a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad for 10 years. How do you now get yourself back out there? I brought on a couples therapist to talk about the guilt you have when you start dating over again because your marriage didn't work out. So things that are not directly related to custody or family law, these people were able to bring in resources that were interesting. It opened my law firm up, it opened myself up as an expert or someone who knows things in this area, and it delivered it in a general way, a way that was very different from what other people were doing. Another thing that I use, and you guys please feel free to take this, is that I host events in the community. So my practice is custody, and I focus primarily on helping fathers. I felt that that was something that was underserved. I was an advocate in the disability world, and now I'm an advocate for fathers. And so I take that, and every June, I host a father's rights workshop. It's completely free. I do it in a community. Sometimes I have community partners. This time I linked up with a congressman and hosted it in his district. But we provide lunch for the gentlemen who come out. We keep it small. It's men only. And I give them the game. I tell them, these are the regulations. Print them out. Here you go. That are going to be used to determine who gets custody. Here are the regulations that determine how child support is calculated. Here you go. Now ask me some questions. Let's talk about what's going on. Let's talk about possible reform. Let's talk about everything. And the first time I did that, every single person who came hired me. Everyone. That wasn't the reason I did it, but it did work out. And every single time since then, I have a good majority of them hire me or refer clients to me. Again, it's a good way to get your name out there. It's something that most people are not bothering to do. So find a way to deliver your information that you're already sitting there and educating yourself in a very unique way. You can go live with Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. You can provide blogging, but just think about it and make it your own. And the last thing I want to talk about is mastery. And this is get your reps in. So if you're training for a race, it's not just running, right? It's stretching, it's your diet, it's cross-training. There's a lot of things that go into running a long race. And the thing is that you kind of have to keep doing it. You have to have a schedule. You have to have a routine. You can't really let up. Those are the things that you need to make sure that you're doing, too. You need to make sure you're educating yourself. You need to make sure you're looking at your marketing plan. You need to make sure you're delivering those services on a very consistent basis. That was something I didn't do this year. Unfortunately, when it came to the Broad Street Run, I was so excited about running that I didn't stretch one time, and I pulled a muscle and was on crutches. And unfortunately, I didn't get an opportunity to run the race. But that's the thing that I want to remind you to do, is that you have to do those things. So one of my favorite things to leave people with is to tell you or encourage you to spend 30 minutes every day reading something about the practice area that you want to go into or that you're just starting out in. Don't let it be something that's related to a case that you're working on right now. That doesn't count. Spend the time, spend 30 minutes looking at a new case law, looking at appeals that are up, looking at past regulations, but spend some time learning and realizing the things that might come up in your practice so that when you're exposed to them, it's not brand new to you. And those things are going to tremendously help you. So this is one of the last Broad Street runs I did. It's a Broad Street Rally. I don't know if you guys watch the Flyers, but that's our nickname for the city. So when we run the Broad Street Run, we run right past the Flyer Stadium. So this was me achieving, I think, my third Broad Street medal. So I hope this was helpful to you. I hope that you find the courage to transition successfully in your practice areas. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. I love answering questions. This is what I love to do. So thank you. And we have a few minutes left. Are there any questions out there? All right, thank you very much.